Welcome to Season 2 of the Erotic Realm podcast. I'm Em, a sexologist, erotic psychology researcher, and nerd obsessed with psychosexuality. I'm also a 24/7 kinkster. You can find everything I'm doing at psychologyofdesire.com. And now for today's episode. The following episode of the Erotic Realm explores submission, not as collapse, but as consciousness, shaped by discernment, shadow work, and integrative kink practice. In this conversation, I'm joined by Sarah from Subinthecity, a submissive, integrative kink therapist, coach, and educator, to explore what happens when desire outpaces self-awareness and how sub-frenzy can blur clarity in power exchange. We talk about feminist submission, mismatch DS styles, menstrual cycles and fluctuating desire, and how integrative kink can become a vehicle for healing rather than reenactment. This is a conversation about maturity in kink, about how conscious submission requires literacy, reflection, and strength. Enjoy. Hi everyone, and welcome to the Erotic Realm. Today we're exploring the erotic realm of Sarah from Subinthecity. Welcome, Sarah.
Hi, thank you so much for having me.
Thanks for being here. So before we jump into the exciting stuff and into kink, I'd love to start with you as a human. What does your day-to-day life look like right now, and how do you move through the world when you're not being a kinkster?
When I'm not being a kinkster. Yeah, it's interesting because my job is kink. So I'm talking about kink a lot of the time in my day-to-day. But I suppose when I'm not doing kink, you'll find me in our cottage, very much in the countryside, walking the dog, playing with my tarot cards or my crystals, and just actually living quite a quiet life, actually, with my husband and my dog. Very happy.
Beautiful. And you mentioned that your job is in kink. Can you tell us a bit more about that?
Yes, so I am an integrative kink therapist, coach, and educator. And essentially, what that means is I have married up my career as a therapist, as a counselor, with my passion for kink and my experience as a kink educator. So now, on a day-to-day, I'm mostly working with clients on kink-related issues, whether that be individuals or couples, helping them to navigate their kinky desires, their kinky lifestyles, working through anything that might come up with this, quite commonly things like shame or resistance or fear or just not knowing where to begin. And I find that this can really help people, not just in the bedroom and in their kink lives, but in every area of their life as well. So I love seeing how that really transforms people's lives when we can dive into kink and things that are considered taboo, because then it opens up so much more for that person. So yeah, I do that with one-to-one sessions, either online or face-to-face in my brand new dungeon studio here, and also through workshops and retreats as well.
Amazing. So you spoke a little bit about how people releasing this shame and developing their kink identities allows them to transform their lives. Can you speak a little bit more to that? Is it the self-confidence that it brings about that transforms their lives? Is it something else that happens?
Yeah, so there are so many things that can come out of that. So yeah, things like self-confidence, but also a lot of skills that really transferable skills that we can take from kink and use in our everyday lives. And I always say that, people in the vanilla world can learn a lot from people in the kink community, especially when it comes to things like boundaries, really being quite open and direct about what we want, feeling worthy of our desires and things we want in life. So not just in the bedroom, but, whether it's a job that you want to go for or you want to move to a specific place. I find that when I'm working with my clients, when they start to learn about boundaries and they start to feel confident in speaking about their desires, this then helps them to go after all of those other things in their lives that they want to change or manifest, which is just fantastic.
That is fantastic. That's amazing work. Thank you for doing it. So let's focus back onto you and hear a little bit about how you identify, both in terms of your sexuality and your kink identity.
Sure. So I would say I would probably describe myself as, in terms of my sexuality, I'm mostly bi-curious, probably more pansexual. Like it really depends on the human being that I'm interacting with.
Mm-hmm.
And when it comes to my kink identity, I'm 100% submissive. So it's funny because the work that I do, and obviously I'm running a business, most people look at me and they assume that I'm dominant. But that's really not the case. I've always been 100% submissive. My style of submission is very much wanting to serve, wanting to be obedient, sometimes a little bit playful and a little bit bratty. But yeah, I really love to just surrender and let go because I am very much leading in my day-to-day life and in my work. That to be able to just surrender and allow someone else to make all the decisions and for me to just follow that, that is what gets me going.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So what would you say are your top 3 kinks at the moment? If you had to explore only 3 kinks forever right now, what would they be and why?
Oh, good question. So I'm probably going to say more on the darker side. So I am very big into consensual non-consent. And that does form a large part of my dynamic with my husband, who is also my master, my dom, and we're in a 24/7 dynamic. So consensual non-consent kind of comes into play in many different themes, and that can look many different ways. I'm happy to explain a little bit more about what that means if
Sure.
that's useful to listeners.
Mm-hmm.
So consensual non-consent is any kind of fantasy or role play where you're role playing that it's not consensual. But of course it is, because everything within kink is all discussed and negotiated. So that could be anything from kidnap fantasy through to forced sex fantasy, or being forced to do certain things or acts by your partner or your master or your dom or whoever that may be. And I really love that feeling of, yeah, playing around with the taboo that I'm being forced to do something that I don't really want to do, but I'm actually really enjoying it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And feeding into that as well, I would say that the second kink that I really love is erotic humiliation. So playing around with humiliation and degradation, objectification. What I love about these kinks is that you can play around with both physical and psychological things that perhaps, again, society would deem really taboo, or it would feel really wrong to actually want those things to happen to you in real life. It's the same with consensual non-consent. And really kind of eroticizing, maybe being called certain names. Like I love to be called a slut. There's such a difference between someone random down the street calling you a slut,
Mm-hmm.
or your partner, your dom, calling you my slut. There's real
Mm.
context there. And that just feels so beautiful and very empowering, actually, for me personally. But language is so different for everyone. And so it really varies, and it's on such a sliding scale. And I have to say that through different times of the month, particularly for me, like depending on my menstrual cycle, actually some of these kinks I am not so into at certain times of the month. But there are times when I can really dive into that, and it really helps me to, over the years, it's really helped me to feel safe to explore certain elements of shame, perhaps, or things that, yeah, like we're told as women that we should not enjoy. But when we can really play around with that with someone who feels safe, it's extremely erotic and really sexy and really hot.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be my second one. And then the third one has to be impact play, spanking. I am a masochist. I do like pain. And I love to be spanked. I love being spanked really hard. I love seeing the marks afterwards and like really wearing them as a trophy to say, yeah, I did a really good job there. I love seeing the bruises and all of the different colors as they change. So yeah, those would definitely be my top three, I would say.
Amazing. So many questions for you. So one really interesting thing that you mentioned was your kink preferences slightly changing with your menstrual cycle. Can you speak a little bit more to that? Because that's something that I've experienced as well, and I've heard quite a few women mention it. So I would love to hear more about how that happens for you.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think, it's so important that anyone who's maybe listening to this and thinking, oh, well, one day I like this and another day I don't, is there something wrong? That doesn't mean that there's something wrong or that you're doing it wrong. It's really important to track, not just our menstrual cycles, but where we are in our life, what's going on for us right now, how are we feeling emotionally, mentally. We're all busy human beings. We all have lives and responsibilities, families, jobs, etc. And particularly with the menstrual cycle, obviously, the change in hormones as we enter into our luteal phase, so the week before our period or during our bleed, we are going to be feeling more tired, perhaps more sensitive, both physically in our bodies and potentially emotionally as well. So, for example, impact play is pretty much a no-go, or it would have to be quite gentle and quite light for me during the week before and during my period. I am someone who bruises quite easily anyway. I am quite sensitive to pain. So it just actually wouldn't allow me to fully relax into the experience, and really enjoy the intentional sensations because it might just feel a little bit more, I might just feel a bit more delicate during that time. So that's how that one kind of gets affected for me. And I find that more during my ovulation stage, I'm feeling more energized, I'm feeling more physically capable. So that's a time when we can kind of explore more intense pain and physical things. But I guess the same for some of the other kinks that I've mentioned and anything that's more on a psychological level. During those sort of phases before the period and during, my capacity emotionally is lowered. So actually I need to go a little bit easier, a little bit more gentle. So perhaps I wouldn't want as much degradation, but I'd be more into a bit more praise. So really hearing that I'm doing a good job and that my dom is happy with me, because of course, I completely trust him, and I know that those things are anything that he says, I still enjoy them. But there are times where we'll have to negotiate and be like, actually, I'm feeling a little bit like sensitive at the moment around these certain topics. And so we'll just adjust accordingly. So, yeah, it's really important just to track how you're feeling and know that if there's a day where you're not really feeling into the things that you're normally into, it's not a sign that there's something wrong necessarily. It's just about checking in with yourself and cutting yourself some slack, being compassionate with yourself on those days.
And also maybe taking an interest in yourself too. Oh, this is very interesting, being curious about the changes in yourself as opposed to judging it. I love that.
Absolutely. Yeah. And, because all of these things, they're signals, they're signs. It's our body and our mind communicating with us. And knowledge is power. The more that you can be curious and kind of try and track some of these things and also communicate these things to your partner, it's going to make your experiences so much more pleasurable because you've got that knowledge and that information that you're sharing.
And yes to pleasure. Sounds incredible.
Yeah.
So you've said that before discovering kink, you actually assumed that sex was just boring. Can you take us back to that version of yourself? What was missing that made it boring?
I think that I just I hadn't really learnt a lot about sex, I suppose. Growing up, I assume that this is the case all over the world because I hear it from so many people, but sex education growing up or in schools wasn't really present for my generation anyway. And so I think when I kind of came to that adult age, where I did start having sex, it was very much kind of just this expectation or this kind of assumption that society tells you, well, this is what sex should look like. This kind of belief that, well, you should just like it. It just happens like this. There's no foreplay. There's no taking your time. It just kind of is very harsh, very kind of bland. It's just doing the deed and that's it.
Mm.
And I suppose I never really took the time to actually consider my pleasure. I mean, we hear about so many women faking orgasms. I was one of those people too for a long time. And I thought, okay, well, maybe it's just not going to happen for me. And it was only really until I started studying sexuality. So I was actually an English literature student, but my thesis when I was at university was all around the representation of female sexuality in literature and in the media. So I was very curious about this and, what women are told sex should be like and how we should show up in sex and in relationships. I think there was also largely a part for me personally that I figured out after many years that what I was kind of trying to give in relationships was I was focusing on the sex aspect, but not focusing on my pleasure. I was just kind of focusing on, okay, how can I please this person? And when I can please them, then that means that they'll like me. And that was, yeah, not the right way to go about it. But that's a worthiness piece, right? It's all about self-worth. And when we can start to realize that we are worthy of pleasure and fulfillment and enjoyment in sex, then that completely changes everything. But it also really requires feeling safe with the other person to be able to do that. So yeah, as I was kind of reading through various different bits of literature in order to write my thesis, I came across a 1950s French novel called The Story of O. And this is ultimately what opened my eyes and changed my views on sexuality. And it really opened my eyes to kink. This is a novel about female submission, about a young woman who's taken by her lover to a French chateau, and essentially lots of different kinky things ensue there. And it's very much based on, her becoming like a submissive slave to her lover. And I think that's probably where a lot of my consensual non-consent fantasies come from. So yeah, that kind of really opened my eyes. And so then when I was sort of dating and trying new things, I remember one time someone put their hand around my throat during sex. And I was really scared initially because, I didn't know them that well. We hadn't really had any sort of communication or conversation about that happening, but I did really enjoy it. Now, obviously, for the listeners here, that is not the way to go about exploring this kind of stuff. It really has to be talked about and discussed and consented to beforehand. I cannot stress that enough. And obviously, I've learned a lot throughout my own personal journey with kink around what is the best way to get into this stuff and how to explore safely. But that just kind of gave me a little indication. Okay, I like these kind of things. I like feeling submissive. I like it when someone else takes the lead. I like it when someone else is a little bit rough. And so that really kind of opened my eyes. And this was really around the time that 50 Shades of Grey was then starting to become a big thing. The book had just come out. I'm not a massive fan of the book or the movies because there are a lot of discrepancies there and it is quite stereotypical and there are a lot of misconceptions about kink, I think, within within that story. But it has done a great job at opening people's eyes to the idea of kink, which I don't think is a bad thing. So yeah, that was kind of what got me into things in the beginning. And I think something I really learnt through exploring kink and now being in a relationship where I feel really safe to explore some of my real deepest, darkest desires is that the thing that was missing when I said that sex was boring before, I think it's intimacy. It didn't feel intimate. It felt very transactional. There wasn't much discussion or communication about what I would like as well, my pleasure, both people's pleasure, really. I'm going to put it out there. Probably the people that I was having sex with, was it really that enjoyable for them too? We were young. When you're young, you don't really know what you like and what you want. You don't really know yourself that well. And so kink was really a great prompt for me to start looking at myself. And this goes back to exactly what I say I do with my clients. It helps you to look at all parts of yourself without judgment and release yourself from that shame and be able to create more pleasurable experiences. So yeah, that's kind of how I got to where I am today, I suppose.
Okay, so we know that you were studying female sexuality and had this awakening from reading such things as the story of O, and we know that you're now in a kinky marriage. What was the process like between those two things? So did you start exploring kink events? Were you online looking for a kinky partner? How did you meet your husband?
It was a long journey of trial and error, a long, long journey. And, I made mistakes along the way and probably didn't go about things in the right way in terms of, when I first discovered that I was submissive and that I was kinky, all I could think about was, I want to have these experiences. I was like a kid in a candy store. And I find this is quite common with people at the beginning of their journey, where you're kind of just really looking for someone compatible that you can explore this with. And I remember being on dating sites, using platforms like FetLife, which, FetLife is great, but people are not vetted on there. So you do have to be careful. And this is something that I learned quite quickly, is that in the kink community, vetting is very normal. So vetting as in meeting with someone, really asking them quite a lot of questions to make sure that they're a safe person and getting to know them before you start engaging in any kind of kink, which I did not do in the beginning. I was going on dates with people and then letting them spank me or let them tie me up. And there were times where it got a little bit sketchy, when people, and not because, they did anything intentionally bad, but because when you're not communicating and you're not having that proper safety kind of mindset, these people were not interested in looking out for me and checking in on me. And there was one time when I'd been tied up and I was on the bed and they weren't like checking in on me properly, and I lost my balance and I hit my face on the bed frame. So I
Oh,
had to go to
no.
work the next day with a bust lip and a black eye.
Oh,
And
dear.
that wasn't because they were a bad person. It was just we weren't doing things in as safe a way as we could. So this was a real learning process for me, and also trying to figure out the best way to tell people that I was kinky as well and navigate that, because I always knew that I wanted what I would call a monogamish relationship. I wanted someone that I could marry, that would commit to me, would have a long-term loving relationship. Yeah, we might explore other things together and other people together, but that ultimately we would have that relationship as well as having the dom sub dynamic. And I was pretty much told very early on, oh, well, you're looking for a needle in a haystack. Those kind of DOMs are really hard to come by. You're not going to be able to find that. And I remember thinking, challenge accepted, because I don't believe that that is the case. And particularly, I come across so many women who I really resonate with. They remind me so much of me at the beginning of my journey, where they just want to meet a decent guy, who's a good dom. And I think we hear so much about fake doms and, guys who are just pretending that they're doms and then they're actually just taking advantage of people. And yes, that does happen. And I did experience that. A lot of fake doms, a lot of people just, when they heard that I was submissive, kind of almost like kinky tourists, just wanting to have an exploration with me for their own curiosity and their own reasons, and then having that experience and then not actually wanting to go any further with me. So yeah, I kind of tried a whole load of different approaches. Do I tell people up front that I'm kinky and that I'm submissive and this is what I'm into? Because it was a non-negotiable for me. I didn't want to have a vanilla relationship. So I tried a whole bunch of different ways, and some of them were okay, but ultimately none of them really worked. And it just so happens that I met my husband in a completely organic, completely vanilla environment.
Oh.
So up until that point, I mean, I'd been to a few kink parties. I'd been to like Torch Garden in London a couple of times, but I hadn't really explored that much because I didn't really have that many kinky friends either. So yeah, I went to a couple of events, but wasn't really actively exploring the kink scene. But I was already then developing my knowledge online through kink and things like that. And then I started to get quite involved with other event organizers and people who were running kink events and sex parties. And that's when I started to build up my kind of experience as an educator, I suppose. So I'm jumping forward quite a few years here now. So by the time that I actually met my husband, which was in 2019, I'd already been working as a kink educator for a few years, because by that point I had found more community through it was actually through Killing Kittens. I don't know if you know of Killing Kittens, but
No, I don't.
they're a sex positive female led platform, and they run events and they run workshops and they do all sorts of things. So I got quite involved in that community, and that was so welcoming. And again, it felt very safe because it's female led. So at the events, men can only go if they're involved. That kind of it led me to get much more involved in the kink scene, and then really look back at all of this experience that I'd had and the trial and error that I'd gone through. And there was a point in time when at one point I was seeing a therapist, or I'd started to see a therapist. And when I told her that I was kinky and that I also wanted to do something work-wise with kink to help educate other people, the first thing that she asked me was I abused as a child?
Oh,
So
no.
safe to say I never went back to that therapist, but this really, again, I do thank her for that, because that was a big period in time that gave me the kick. It was like the sign to say, yes, Sarah, this is actually what you're here to do. You're here to demystify, to debunk, to educate people, and to help people release this shame and work through this stuff so they can explore kink in a safe and pleasurable way. So yeah, that was kind of the point in time when I started to combine my work as a therapist with kink education. And then fast forward to 2019, I was just out for a friend's birthday, not looking for anything, had kind of been getting over a breakup for the past 6 months. And I met my husband in a Latin party. So he's Colombian. He asked me to dance salsa about 3 times. I said no. And then I eventually said yes. And we kind of just took it from there. And it's very interesting how that evolved because we didn't really engage in much kink for the first year or so of our relationship. Mainly because one, I wanted to take it slow. I didn't want to scare him off.
Mm-hmm.
And two, because at the time we were sharing a flat with other people, but then when we bought our own house, that's when we could fully start to explore this. Like we both knew that we wanted it. He kind of always knew that he was kinky and was a dom, but never had really had the safe space to explore it, had always kind of felt shamed for it. So we were both in a position where we were like, yes, we want to make this work and we want to make this happen. And then it just kind of flourished from there. And now he is a massive part of Subinthecity. I don't think he ever thought that he would have a career as a professional dom, but now he is the house dom for Subinthecity. He works with clients, he gives them experiences, he is one of the facilitators, he does all the demos for our workshops, and he is one of the most sweetly sadistic, emotionally intelligent doms I have ever met. And
Mm.
I feel like my manifestation of this needle in a haystack is here.
Mm. Mm-hmm. Amazing. So I'd love to hear a little bit more about the process that you went through together, because it
Mm.
sounds like you didn't rush it at all. And there's a lot of subs out there that when they meet someone that they feel they're submissive towards, they want to go from 0 to 100. But it sounds like you
Oh, yeah.
actually took the process quite slowly. Can you take us through how that worked for both of you?
Absolutely. And yes, I hear the, 0 to 100 thing. That's what we refer to as sub frenzy. And
Mm-hmm.
I've definitely been there and done that in previous relationships or with previous people. But this time I really wanted to approach things differently. And also, there's something, even though I was more experienced at the time, or I had had more experiences than he had, what's really important is that we both meet on the same page. So I literally went back to basics. I was doing what I would tell my clients to do. So we would sit down, we'd use some of my resources, one of them being a yes, no, maybe checklist, which essentially is a whole list of different kinks. And you can tick whether it's a yes, it's a no, or it's a maybe, whether you like to give that thing or receive that thing. We did that. We did a few other like online like BDSM quizzes and things, and it gave us just a few starting points for discussion. And this is something I really recommend as an icebreaker when you're first starting out. That and something I often hear from people as well, particularly submissives, is, well, I don't want an inexperienced Dom because I don't want to be having to teach the Dom what to do because that doesn't feel very submissive. And there was a point in time when I had that belief too. But what I've learned over the years is there really is no such thing as an experienced Dom, because no matter how much practical or lifestyle experience you might have, when you meet someone new, you're not an expert in their world. You have to get to know them and learn them. So going back to basics is always going to be the way to get started. You have to learn about the other person. What does submission mean to me? And what does submission mean to him? Because just because someone's a dom and someone's a sub, that doesn't mean they're automatically compatible.
Mm-hmm.
Because the style of submission that you might be into might not be compatible with someone's style of dominance. So it was really about having these conversations and having fun with it as well, because I think a lot of people can see having these conversations as a little bit awkward, a little bit clinical. But we'd sit there, we'd have a drink, or we'd sit in bed and we'd look at something together online or answer some questions together. And we just took it real slow without putting any pressure on each other and just slowly built it up from there. Okay, what do we want to try maybe over the next few weeks? And just not trying to do too much at once. I think picking a couple of things that you want to explore, trying it, talking about it again, debriefing on it, and then building upon that.
Mm-hmm.
And so,
All right. Quick pause. Phoenix at callmephoenix.com creates erotic audios you can download instantly. And I'm warning you now, her voice is a problem.
Mm-hmm. Now say it with me. I obey Emma. Good. Now go to callmephoenix.com and plug that in. I obey Emma. All caps, no spacing. $5 off just for being teachable. That's how I like you.
Callmephoenix.com. Use I Obey Emma for $5 off any audio. Link in the show notes.
our dynamic is always evolving and changing, as will everyone's. We make sure that we have regular check-ins, but ultimately we are only human. So I think sometimes people look at us and think we have this perfect dynamic and we must be like living the ultimate kinky lifestyle. But at the end of the day, as I say, we have lives as well, and life happens sometimes. So, I mean, we've been through a very busy period of our life last year. We were getting married, we were planning a wedding for the couple of years before that. So when life gets busy, it's okay to kind of have to put things down for a little bit. And we maybe weren't exploring as much as we would have liked to, but that's okay. It's just about adjusting to make sure that it doesn't become a chore, because when it becomes a chore, that's when it's no longer enjoyable. And then that builds resentment. So it's about working together and adapting and evolving through those like different times and periods in your life.
Thank you for sharing. It's really interesting to hear about how your dynamic has evolved and continues to evolve. Now, you mentioned in there that just because someone's submissive and they have a partner that's dominant, it doesn't mean that their styles of submission and dominance match. And sometimes there might be a mismatch there. I'm wondering, what are the most common mismatches that you see in people's styles of submission and dominance?
So a common one that I see where it comes up quite a lot is with submissives who identify as brats. So just to explain that bratting is a style of submission where the submissive is quite playful and will like to challenge the dominant, will like to maybe talk back or try and find loopholes in rules or tasks that they've been given. They'll be quite cheeky. But typically, a brat will ultimately want to surrender in the end. They want to be submissive. They do want to be tamed by their dominant. But something I see in a lot of submissives, even if they don't identify as brats, is this kind of behavior, which we refer to as topping from the bottom, where a submissive will try to take control of what's happening. And sometimes this happens subconsciously, sometimes it is conscious. But something we have to be aware of, particularly whether this style of submission is being intentionally bratty or whether you're, for some reason, trying to control a scene for whatever reason, there's some resistance there. Something that's really important to remember is that dominants have their limits too. And not all DOMs like a bratty submissive. Some DOMs prefer an obedient submissive or a submissive who actually wants to surrender. There are DOMs who really like brats. They like the playful challenging. They like the back and forth, and it's part of the role play. But even with that, it needs to be negotiated. Like, where is the line for the dominant between bratting and being disrespectful or potentially discouraging the dominant from actually wanting to lead? It's something that comes up a lot, that we forget that the dominant has limits too. There might be a submissive who is a masochist, who wants to be spanked harder. And if the dominant doesn't feel comfortable doing that because maybe they don't feel that they know that person well enough yet, or that there's still some kind of barrier there for them, or it's using a new implement that they're not so sure about, it's so important that the submissive doesn't put pressure on that. We always need to be on the same page as each other. And sometimes we just don't like the same things. I'll often work with couples where their top three kinks are not the same thing.
Mm-hmm.
And then they sort of look at me and go, oh, well, this is terrible. What are we going to do? And it's not such a bad thing. I always say just focus on the things that do align. So even if that's not your top three things that you'd really like to be exploring right now, what other things are there from that list that you've looked at that you both agree on? Because there will be something.
Mm-hmm.
That's your doorway. That's your entry in. Because
Mm.
then you can start to build the trust and the foundations of the good communication and the exploration. Like, there are things that I thought I would never be comfortable with in kink. And that's based on past experiences and people not really giving a shit about whether I liked it or not. But now, with my husband and my dom, I actually feel safe and want to explore those things. And I never thought that I would like that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's about being patient, taking time, and not rushing it, basically. And I know it can be tempting to, especially in those initial stages when you want to explore everything and you want to have it right now. But actually, there's no point in trying to explore something when one person is in one position and the other person is 100 miles ahead. It's not going to work. If you can come onto the same page, and what that typically means is you have to go at the pace of the slowest person. I don't really like saying it that way, but that's essentially what it is, going at the pace of the slowest person, because you'll actually make greater progress by doing that than trying to rush ahead.
Mm-hmm. That's great advice. Thank you. So, one of the traditions on the podcast is exploring some research with you. And today's research come from Charles Moser, who's a physician and sexologist who has spent over 50 years studying BDSM and diverse sexualities. And he often pushes back against their pathologization. So in his article, Reflections on a Career Dedicated to the Study of BDSM and Diverse Sexualities, Moser argues that much of the harm around BDSM doesn't come from the practice themselves, but from how outsiders interpret them. So he shows how clinicians, researchers, and institutions often project fear and moral panic onto consensual erotic intensity, mistaking meaning for pathology, much like your experience with the therapist that you mentioned before. So his work insists that consent, context, and participant experience matter more than surface appearances. And one of the things that he describes in the article is that he nearly once intervened in a BDSM scene because he thought harm was occurring, only to realize afterwards that he was projecting his own fear and the people in the scene were actually completely enjoying it. Have you seen similar misreadings of submission in therapeutic or cultural spaces yourself?
Yes, I do see this quite often. I think we did have an experience of this at our retreat last year. So we run a conscious kink retreat every year, and in the past we have had where we're watching a performance or we're watching two facilitators interact. This was Shibari, actually. This was a Shibari performance. And it was incredibly moving. Like it was emotional because she was suffering. You could physically see the struggle and the pain, the tears, but you could also see the love, the affection, the connection, the trust between them. And there were some people there that really struggled to watch that because they felt like perhaps she was there against her will and that she, perhaps she was in an abusive relationship. Even though she had sat there and explained to us that it's completely consensual and she enjoys it, and this space that she goes to when they're doing things like that is, it's about exploring these uncomfortable emotions that come up, and that's what she wants to experience. So I do think that sometimes it is difficult for people to put themselves in someone else's shoes and understand why they might like what they're experiencing or what they're witnessing. But I think the point is we don't have to. And it sounds like this is exactly what this, research is saying, that we're projecting our own emotions or feelings or fears or prejudices onto what we're seeing. And I always say to clients that come to me some clients are very, very keen on understanding why they are the way that they are. Almost as if, I want to know what's wrong with me kind of way. And I always say, the quicker you can stop searching for that why, the better, because this isn't about understanding why you are the way you are, like as in, it doesn't mean that something has happened in your life that has made you this way. If you can have an acceptance for what you like, then that's going to make things so much easier, and you're going to be able to have more pleasurable experiences. But I think there's such an assumption that there's another misconception about kink, is that there is like this big link between trauma and being kinky. And it's just like the therapist that I went to that assumed that I must have been abused as a child to be like, because I like kink. There is no direct correlation between traumatic events or abuse and being kinky. Like, there are people who have experienced trauma who are kinky people. And I have worked with people who have experienced things in their life that they're actually using kink as a way to rewrite that narrative. And that can be a beautiful thing because it allows you to take control of the situation and the narrative and rewrite those memories or rewrite the story. That doesn't work for everyone, and you must have therapy alongside that as well to just make sure that, you are looking after yourself. So that is possible. But that doesn't mean that everyone who's into kink has trauma or it means something bad. I think there is a lot of demonization around these kind of kinky activities. And I know that it was considered, BDSM and sadomasochism, it was considered to be like a mental health condition or disorder for such a long time. I think it was only removed from the DSM in, I can't remember what year, but really not that long ago. So it has been pathologized, and it still is, but really quite strongly pathologized only up until a few years ago. And now we're starting to see more people talking about it and being more open about it, and more movies popping up about it. And while, they may not be perfect representations, I think it's all towards the greater good of opening this discussion around it. However, the other thing that I will just add to this is, if it wasn't so pathologized and if it wasn't so taboo, would we still like it?
What do you think?
I don't think so. Because I think a big part of why we like kink is because it is taboo. It feels naughty. It feels like something that maybe we shouldn't be doing. And that can be a large part of what makes it exciting and thrilling. So, yeah, I kind of think that actually maybe it needs that in order to remain something that people actually want to explore and find exciting.
The taboo definitely adds a charge to the erotic aspects of it, for sure. In the scene that you described at the retreat, I'm curious to understand that a little bit more. Do you think it was the fact that she was crying that people found the most difficult aspect of it, or was it the scene in general?
So yeah, possibly the such kind of visible emotion coming from her. And it was a suspension scene, so she was being suspended in the air with the rope. And it was very performative too, right? You can definitely see the performative element to it. But it was very intense. And I don't know if it was just the fact that there were tears, but there was, the element. So there was the bondage element, but then there was kind of the humiliation element. She was being exposed, her dress pulled down, but also just such an intense connection between the two as well. That maybe felt for some people, this is something they've never seen before. And I can
Right.
see how it would feel. I don't know what the word is, but just that you would have a lot of questions about that if you've never seen anything like that before.
Yeah, I guess for people that haven't seen it, their cultural script is if you see a woman helpless and in distress at the hands of a man, then, it's abuse. And that's the only script that a lot of people have.
Yes. And I think when it comes to things like enjoying pain and being a masochist, I think for some people that can feel quite difficult to comprehend if you're not wired that way either. But then, I mean, this is again one of those myths that I love to debunk, that when it comes to experiencing pain within kink, whether that be impact play or being bound in an uncomfortable way, that it's not always about like the harshest, roughest, hardest pain that you can provide. It is erotic in the sense that we're providing or creating an intentional sensation. And yeah, that sensation may be painful, but everything must be done with intention. There must be a meaning to it. And that's what really creates that deeper connection between the two people, the giver and the receiver. And that's what makes it erotic. It's not just kind of like going and smacking someone as hard as you possibly can. It's actually about taking them on a journey through different sensations. So yeah, I think it's one of those things that until you kind of explore it for yourself and you can see the different perspectives and go out to perhaps different events or go and see different things, that you start to realize people who enjoy kink, we're just like anyone else, just regular human beings. We like what we like. And as long as what we're doing is safe, it's sane, it's consensual, it's legal, then why should that be demonized or pathologized?
Very well said. So you speak about kink as a doorway to the shadow self or the parts of ourselves that are hidden. What parts of you did submission allow you to meet?
Good question. Yeah, so I think being able to fully submit and surrender really allowed me to let go of control and, in a way, let go of that kind of inner people pleaser, and which maybe sounds a little bit contradictory because as a submissive, I want to please my dom, but it allows me to just let go of all of this responsibility in the outside world and know that I can just be. I don't have to, put on a facade or try to be someone that I'm not. I can just fully be completely exposed and vulnerable. And I think that's always been, I guess, a little bit of a challenge for me over the years. But that also comes with finding someone that you can really trust, to kind of lead you on that journey. But yeah, it's really helped me to feel more confident in that aspect, I suppose, that, I can just be completely stripped bare, quite literally and metaphorically, and be enough for somebody, like more than enough, which I just think is beautiful. So it really taps into, yeah, this kind of element of vulnerability that perhaps over the years I've not always shown so easily. I've always been someone who's very strong, very independent, can do everything for myself. So it's actually allowed me to learn to receive a lot more, not just sexually or in kink, but in life in general.
I love that. You also reference inner child work and kink. Can you speak a bit more to this? How does consensual power exchange create safety for exploration of these inner child aspects of the self?
Well, I suppose there are kind of two ways, because if we look at kink as an adult's way of playing, right? It's an adult playground, and I think in society in general, we're not really taught to prioritize our pleasure or joy or play. There's a real kind of emphasis on work hard until you retire and then you can enjoy your life. And I think for a lot of people in their upbringing, perhaps they may have had to grow up quite quickly. This is certainly the case I see in a lot of my clients, for whatever reason that may be, right? That we're kind of forced to grow up quite quickly. And those days of just being able to prioritize play and prioritize joy and just being and just having fun for the sake of having fun, they disappear pretty quickly. And once we get into our adult life, it might feel like we have all of these responsibilities that we have to take care of. And so exploring kink is really kind of a beautiful way to tend to our inner child, to allow ourselves to just enjoy play and enjoy the things that allow us to just be our authentic selves without fear of judgment or feeling like we have to kind of do all of these other responsibilities that we have. So in general, seeing kink as a form of play is going to make our inner child happy. There's also another way that we can explore this kind of inner child work, particularly if you are into age play or kind of caregiver little dynamics. So a different style of submission is referring to yourself as a little. So generally in an age play dynamic, this is where the submissive would be role playing an age that is younger than their actual self. These kind of dynamics, just to clarify, are not rooted. Again, this is the kind of pathology of it or the demonization of it. It's not rooted in things like pedophilia or wanting to have sex with a minor.
Right.
It's about the freedom that it can create for the submissive. And actually, I see elements of this kind of weaved into all styles of submission, really. I wouldn't identify as a little myself, but there are elements of my dynamic where I feel like I'm being cared for by my dominant. I feel like I'm being nurtured. Sometimes there'll be things that my dominant will tell me to do that make me feel small, like, having naps or bedtimes or making sure I drink enough water. Or we have this little thing where We have the chocolate fairy who leaves little chocolates around the house for me. And in
Cute.
those moments, it feels quite like childlike and playful and cute. And it's that kind of feeling of being able to go into a space where you can just be a child. You can literally, if you wanted to, you might want to do activities that a child would do, coloring, drawing, playing with toys or stuffed animals or dolls or whatever that might be. And that is like a much more, I guess, literal form of embracing that younger child within you.
Mm-hmm.
But overall, as I say, it's just about allowing yourself the opportunity to play and prioritizing play. That makes our inner child happy. We all have an inner child that has needs and maybe wants to be heard. And so when we can tend to that part of ourselves, it it just helps us integrate more as a whole.
Mm-hmm.
It's about that holistic approach to our well-being, really.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, beautifully said. And I love that you highlighted the play aspects of kink because quite often we hear about the darker aspects and people focus on that, but it can also be very light and playful and joyful. And that's just as exciting and rewarding. Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. It can be playful and silly, and it also doesn't have to be sexual as well. I
Mm,
think, kink can be completely platonic if you wanted it to be. It can be just role playing or just tying someone or just spanking a friend because it's fun.
mm-hmm.
And, I've worked with other sort of facilitators on previous retreats where we've seen sort of interactions between them where it can go from quite serious and intense and intimate to very silly and playful through things like tickling and making jokes. And we've actually had like people quite confused by that sometimes, and because it's not what they typically see. It's not the stereotype. We see dark dungeons, everyone wearing cloaks, very eyes wide shut. And actually, it doesn't have to always be like that. That's great if you like that type of style of kink, but it really doesn't have to be just that. There's so many other ways that it can look.
Mm-hmm. Okay, I'm so curious to hear this from you because you've been exploring kink for quite a while in so many different forms. What is a peak erotic experience that you're happy to share with us today? An experience that's really stayed with you?
Oh, good question. A peak erotic experience. I would say probably really being able to fully explore my limits as a masochist with impact play with my husband, um, where, I have never experienced intensity like that with anyone else, and also not with him. It was the first time for both of us to experience such intensity. And so that was really testing my limits, my pain thresholds, and just the amount of surrender that went into that and the connection that we felt between us.
Mm,
And it's not just that scene and, really pushing both of our limits in terms of how intense we want to go with the impact, but it was also the aftercare, was like the best aftercare that I've ever experienced from anyone. He made me food. He brought it along with him to the dungeon, wrapped me in a blanket, fed me sweets, literally fed me this food, like
mm,
spoon fed me. It was beautiful. And we just had like such a beautiful moment afterwards where he made sure that I was so cared for and looked after. And I think that's people forget that the aftercare is also a part of the interaction and a part of the scene. It's not just something that comes afterwards, it's like part of the whole thing. Without it, the scene itself would have felt so different. So,
Beautiful.
yeah, that's just very memorable.
Yeah, I can see why. So that's a past experience. What about looking ahead? What edges of your erotic self are you most curious to explore next? Or what's something kinky that you're looking forward to exploring?
Well, I think maybe to explore more different dynamics with other people, maybe with other submissives, just seeing what the dynamics are like with more than just the two of us. I think that would be quite interesting. I mean, it's something that we have explored previously, and it's something that we're continually discussing and negotiating, because once you start to add more people, then like, especially like, there's one thing that is playing with other people, but then playing with other people with the dynamics on top of it and the kink element on top of it, there's so much more at play to discuss. But that's certainly something that I think we're excited to explore more of. Yeah.
Fun. And you also mentioned a couple of times that you run events with your partner. Can you share a bit more about those? They look really fascinating.
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a few different styles of events. So we have the educational workshops, which we run a whole bunch of different educational workshops on lots of kink subjects, everything from sort of introduction to kink and dominance and submission through to practical skills like impact play, wax play, shibari, how to create exciting kinky scenes. And we do those both online and in our physical space as well, where you actually get to put things into practice and have that sort of hands-on guidance from us. We also have our social events called Cocktails and Kink, which we run monthly or sort of every other month. And they are normally in a cocktail bar. We normally have, on average, about 100 people attend, everyone through from like complete newbies through to seasoned kinksters. And this is just a place for you to come and connect with like-minded people. It's not a play party, it's just a social. But we do also add in sort of educational elements. So we'll have kink furniture there where my partner, my husband, Master Carlos, he will be offering taster sensation play sessions for anyone who's curious to try. And it just allows people to take that first step into the world of kink. So if you're nervous and don't know where to begin, coming to an event like that allows you to chat to people and take that next step if you want to, or just observe. And then we have smaller dungeon socials and parties, which we've just started running because we've just opened our brand new dungeon space
Ooh.
here in Bournemouth on the south of England where we live. So these are kind of more intimate events, probably about 30 people. And again, it's more of a social with light play allowed. So, a little bit of light spanking or whatever. It's just an opportunity. If you've never had a chance to be in a dungeon, this is a great way to get accustomed to a space like this and learn about the equipment, learn about the toys, and just start to feel more confident in this kind of environment. And then finally, we have our retreats, which we run sort of once a year. And normally we do that somewhere nice and warm and sunny. So the last 2 years, it's been in Portugal. We've done Spain before. And essentially, that's a nice, small, intimate group of people. It could be singles or couples or anyone in any constellation. For a whole weekend in a private villa with a private chef. We have a whole weekend of kink educational workshops. And it's really about building community and they're just very transformative weekends. We like to combine a lot of holistic practices and spiritual practices with kink. So we'll have like cacao ceremonies and meditation and yoga, and it's just a really great way to integrate all of that learning in a nice, beautiful, sunny space.
They all sound incredible. So where can people find out more about you and your work?
Yeah, so you can find out about me at subinthecity.com on my website, or you can check me out on FetLife. Again, Subinthecity _ is my username. And I list all of our events on there usually, but they're all on my website as well. And you can also follow me on Instagram. And I also have a podcast on Spotify called Bonding.
Oh, do you?
Yes, little bite-sized episodes all about kink.
Oh, cool. I didn't realize that. I'll have to check it out.
Yeah.
So if you had to describe yourself, your erotic self, in one word, what would it be and why?
My erotic self in one word. I think I'm going to use a word that people often say to me, and that is intriguing. I think it's quite intriguing. I'm always constantly exploring how I can challenge myself and challenge my edges, and yeah, constantly be intrigued by how I can do that and how I can push myself further in kink specifically.
Beautiful. Well, Sarah, thank you for sharing your erotic realm and for exploring submission, shadow, and erotic evolution in such a beautiful way. And thank you for everything you do for the community. It's been a pleasure chatting to you.
Thank you so much for having me. This has been a great conversation. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you again. I'm Em, and this has been the Erotic Realm podcast. Thank you for listening to the Erotic Realm. If this episode stirred something in you, please take a moment to follow the show, leave a rating, or write a review on wherever you're listening. It helps more people find the show and brings visibility to this deeper conversation about eroticism and self-understanding. I'd also like to invite you to dive deeper into the psychology of desire, including my writing, research, and upcoming courses over at psychologyofdesire.com. This is where I release the Psychology of Desire case files, behind-the-scenes thoughts, and intimate reflections every week, plus more. Until next time, stay curious, stay embodied, and keep exploring. Also, as always, stay perverted.